a while ago you talked about the best way forward after the ruling was issued, and you mentioned negotiations as the best way forward. Can you tell us more about it?
Yes, I think what I've said, because I was looking for some ways how to handle this case afterwards. I think there are two ways. One is persuasion, and show that we don't ask anything more, but only what is granted to us by the convention. And we expect that you, as a party to that convention, do the same. So this is how you can solve this without negotiations. You have to talk. Talk without preconditions. The only precondition is both you and I accept the rulings of international law. And our verdict, our award, is giving only a little more precise instruments to negotiate.
You talk a lot about preconditions. Can you give us example of preconditions that are commonly laid out in cases like this, in negotiations? Like what preconditions could endanger a ruling like the Hague ruling on the South China Sea?
Precondition would be, for example, we'll start to negotiate if you recognize historic rights of ours. You recognize that we have a large part of South China Sea because we were there 2,000 years ago. This is precondition. You can come to the conference table and say, okay, this is a question that we have to make sea border because we have been entitled by the convention to have access 200 miles from our baseline towards the sea, and you have the same, and look how far we can go. We can overlap, or we are not having access to each other. So let's make a sea border. Don't talk about any preconditions. Use convention first. What convention is allow us to do? You come to me and say, convention gives you 12 miles plus 12 miles of additional strip of water, and then you have 200 miles from baseline. And then you have the same, how far we are from each other. If you are more far, this water is not belonging neither to you nor to us. So this is negotiation.
No preconditions.
No, I negotiated with Germany and with Russia about the limitation of our side borders because they have access to Baltics. And in 1985, with Russia, I negotiated only 2 days because we prolonged this division of the territorial waters straight. We didn't make any changes.
But negotiations with preconditions, I think that's what's ideal. But in the real world...
I will give you one example. With the former GDR, German Democratic Republic, I negotiated five years. Because East Germany, communist East Germany, in the Bay of Pomerania, they had enlarged their territorial water from 3 miles to 12 miles. But this bay was not very wide. So this 12 miles covered access to our ports. And this bay was not this one, so you can, if you enlarge this, they control movement of our ships and foreign ships to our ports, because they have to go through their territorial waters. And Baltic is a shallow sea, so we have to build channels to allow bigger ships to go to our ports, two of our ports. So we propose them, you withdraw from this area, because you are entitled to 12 miles, but we are entitled to access to the sea. How we can go with this? So they had the same problem with Denmark. So they negotiated and they withdrew 12 miles to allow Danish ships to go to their ports on the high seas, not territorial waters. And there is some situation similar between Belgium and the Netherlands. To Rotterdam, they had to go through the Belgian waters. So they negotiated and they allowed them to go through this. So finally, after 5 years of negotiations, they withdraw themselves. This corridor, which is going to our ports, is now under our jurisdiction.
Yeah, but in other negotiations, there are always stronger countries and the weaker countries. And in the case of the Philippines and China, China is always stronger economically speaking and militarily speaking. So I mean, you're pushing for negotiations on equal terms, but how can we be equal if China is richer and we are
poor? This is fact of life.
Yeah.
You cannot change this.
Yeah.
But if you are tall and I am short, so it doesn't mean that we are not equal. So it's the same with the countries. So this is not a question of how big you are, how strong you are. It's a question that you have the same rights as I have. In your country and mine, I have one vote to vote for my president. And if you have relations with bigger country, the big country has the same one vote in the United Nations.
And what role would the ruling play in negotiations with China?
I think it's a clarification of two important provisions of the United Nations Convention of the Law of the Sea. First is question that the historic rights were extinguished as long as you are a member of the club and the state which is party to the United Convention. So every member of this convention, party to a convention, has the same rights. This is no others thing. And if they have the same rights, this is question of decision that you have to forget about your expectations. You join the club, you have the same rules. There is no other way. And this second important decision is what is rock, what is island. Island is defined by Article 121. Is elevated land in the sea which could sustain human beings or economic life by its own. Rocks are not. Rocks could be two types of rocks. Rocks which under high tide are above the water or below the water. And those which are above the water and they cannot sustain life, human beings living there for good, as a colony working there, or economic life, they have only 12 nautical miles. Those which are underwater belong either to the high seas or to continental shelf of the country which has covered the water by their economic free zone, not to others. Because if you have this, you mix apples with strawberries, you know. It's something different.
So it's these two things that we can bring into negotiations with China.
Yes, well, you can.
The clarified rights.
Yes, so there is question of preconditions. Now, so we can sit down to discuss. Here you have the same book as I have. you have the international convention, which is allowing us to have 200 nautical miles of economic zone. And you have the same. Don't come to our economic zone.
A follow-up question would be, if we would end up negotiating with China, why did we need to file a case? Why was this important?
I mentioned in my intervention that for many years you negotiated with China, but always you negotiated not, I don't know the details because I was not party to the negotiations, but I understand that you negotiated not having a strong legal basis. You didn't use convention probably, or you used conventions a little bit superficially. What we did, we make something more precise, that every country, every state member of the club, namely the party to the convention, has the same rights. The Philippines is entitled to have 200 miles from the baseline.